Today we are here with my Pyro friend Will Harvey from Finale. Will is really the game changer in terms of the firework industry of this century, I will say. Will have created Finale, that is the 3D software that almost everyone now is using. It's more or less becoming the standard of the design of fireworks. So hello Will, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you.
How is the weather there in California?
Well, it's just a beautiful day to be inside. It's beautiful outside, but we're all in California
Yeah, we
required.
are. We are. You are in lockdown. You call it lockdown, no? Yeah.
Yeah,
And now it's being for how long have you been locked? For many
uh,
weeks?
just about a month, I
A
think, since
month.
the middle of March.
And it's the situation improving there, or
It's hard to say. It's a little surreal because it's a beautiful day outside, and you actually can go out and have a barbecue by yourself.
yeah. Well, I have bought this shirt in America last time I went there. That was in January, and the idea was that I will use it on my barbecue season in Portugal. But now we can do a barbecue like you say, but alone.
Well, I like the shirt, so
Thank you, Will. So we have met in Malta. Yeah, you remember me when we prepared this talk that I have asked you if your software that was at the time was Finale Business if support multi-inventory files. I really don't remember that. Can you help me to remember
yeah.
what I
Well,
have
I
asked
can remember very well
you?
because you turned me down. I mean, you were asking me lots of questions about the software,
Yeah.
and had it. You were currently using another system, and it was integrated into your inventory management system
Yeah.
by way of basically by way of Microsoft Access databases,
Yeah.
and that was a requirement for you that any software that you used for scripting could export databases that could interface with your inventory management system.
Hmm.
And I couldn't figure out a way to say yes. We couldn't do it at the time. So that was, I don't know, was that like 8 years ago or 9 years ago?
Yeah, maybe around that. Yeah.
Well, it stuck in my head because you turned me down, so I had to. It was one of the first features I made sure I implemented in 3D because I remembered, like, all right, I've got to do that.
I'm very curious to know how you start your interest in fireworks because, well, imagine your education is in terms of programming, and fireworks. It was not, I imagine, your start point in terms of work. How did you start the fireworks?
No, boy, I have a lot of respect for people who started out with fireworks being their work. But for me, I just started out in fireworks because I loved fireworks, and I not related to my work or my career or anything. I volunteered shoveling sand and loading mortar at one of the local fireworks companies, and made airbursts out of flash and cellophane to hang in some indoor shows and stuff like that. Basically, just
And this
a
was
personal interest.
before your business, before your first business.
Yeah, this was before my business. It was about 20 years ago, and at the time I had I don't know if you can remember them. I had a Mac Plus computer.
Okay.
Mac Pluses had just come out with color,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a 68020 processor and was barely powerful enough to simulate fairly realistic fireworks. So I wrote a simulation with on my Mac computer, or Mac 2. I'm sorry, it was just after the Mac Plus. It was the Mac 2 that had color. So I started writing fireworks simulations then because they're just beautiful. I love computer graphics and I love fireworks, and so the thought of being able to do it on computers was just fascinating to me from a artistic and technology view. So I tried to get Electronic Arts, who is my publisher for video games. I'd written a number of video games back then. And I tried to get Electronic Arts to publish a fireworks construction set video to create fireworks.
Do you know that there was a game in Japan? More or less on
In Japan?
Like, they have the tradition, of course, of manufacturing shells. And there was a game that was built, I saw it, of course, was in Japanese, maybe 15 years ago or more. And the idea was like you build a shell, you place all the stars on the shell, and after you see the result of the shell. So it's really interesting.
No, I was not aware of that. Yeah. That may have been contemporaneous with my efforts to get Electronic Arts to do the same. Well, so then, that was a while ago. But then a whole decade passed, 10 years before I started Finale Fireworks. And in that time, what changed was that computer graphics became much more powerful. And about 10 years ago, I started to imagine that at the rate that computers were getting faster, that we could eventually simulate fireworks with almost photorealism, almost the same on your computer as you see in the real world or as you take a video. In the last 10 years now, since starting Finale, the computers have lived up to that expectation. The computers are continuing to get faster. The GPUs or the graphics units are continuing to get faster, to the point that I think for computer speed, we're really only a couple of years away from having the computer speed to simulate graphics in a way that you couldn't tell the difference between what you're seeing on your screen and the real world. The software, I think we will be better 2 years from now than we are today, but I'm not claiming that our software is going to be photorealistic in 2 years. I think it'll be better, but photorealism is a high bar, so we've got a way to go.
You told me you write games. That was when you start your professional life, was working on the game industry?
Yeah, I had kind of an early start. I started writing video games actually when I was 15 years old in high school, and I wrote a program called Music Construction Set, which was the first sheet music editor on personal computers. So if you are a musician and you want to compose on your computer, it's kind of like a word processor for composing, except the computer can also play back what you are, what you're composing, so you can interact with it. So that was in around 1984, I think. So I guess even longer than 20 years ago. That was how I got my start. Electronic Arts was just starting at the time, and they picked it up and published it, and it was one of their best sellers. And I went on to write other video games for Electronic Arts as well. One called The Immortal, a miniature golf game called Zany Golf, on old computers that people who are 50 years old now can all remember.
This was on the start of the PC as a...
Yeah, it was Apple II, IBM PC, Amiga, Atari, Commodore 64.
So that on the 80s, no?
GS,
on the 80s.
Yeah, of the 80s. It was a lot of fun.
So moving forward, you start to work with Fireworks before, and you always had the idea to program something that will be a Fireworks programming tool when you were doing this work as a computer gaming programmer.
Well, initially, I was most fascinated by the art. Basically, I thought fireworks were beautiful, and I thought that it would be beautiful to be able to reproduce them on the computer and play with them. So that was what drew me to it. And then I went to some conventions in the United States, one called PGI, or the Pyrotechnics Guild International Convention. And I saw there how professional fireworks display companies designed their shows, by and large. And I thought at that point that we could do better. Basically, that it would be possible. I had in my mind, what you see is what you get.
Yeah, like
drag and drop style, WYSIWYG drag and drop style software. And I thought that if we could create software that allowed people to kind of experiment and fudge and move things around and visually interact with the art that you're creating, I thought that would make it possible to create more finely tuned, more artistically locked in designs than would be possible if you had to do it entirely in your head.
Yeah. Well, I start to design before all of that, before all of this 3D. And we were used, all my generation designers and before, we were used to mentally visualize the show. But I think this ability will not be with the new designers. No, they will not have this ability because we really mentally tried to visualize what we were doing. And when this thing of the 3D software started, for design, I was not really into it, because it was complex, and I continued to visualize it. I didn't feel the need of that. Of course, when the designs start to be more complex, like creating patterns, creating right angles, like different kind of angles, I find that this was really, really important, because it's impossible to make a complex design nowadays. We know just trying to visualize what you were, because we basically was like around 98, 99 when I started to program with the software. And we were basically working on an Excel sheet, like just seeing letters and numbers. And so it's completely different from nowadays. From, that time, just some kind of people could be a designer. Now I think it's more democratic, anyone with your tool can be a designer. So also I'm curious, why you choose the name Finale for your company?
Well, it has a nice ring to it. It starts with an F, and fireworks starts with an F. So Finale Fireworks kind of runs together. Actually, finding a name that you and the people that you work with all agree on is sometimes a hard task. And when we came up with Finale, it was just, all right, that's it. We all liked it. It was simple, and we could remember it.
When did you start Finale as a software, the Finale business?
The Finale software business I started about 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago. And at that point, I took, I initially wrote the first version of the software as something like, I viewed it as a sketch pad or something where people could try out their ideas and then use real computer scripting software to script a show. Yeah. And I took that to the PGI convention and showed it to people. And the interest was, both bad and good. On the bad side, people said, well, we're not really interested in having just a sketch pad. What we actually want is something to script our shows. So the good part was, they basically told me, look, if you can turn this into something that we can really script our shows, then it would be something that I would be interested in. And then I guess the really good part was that that dozens of people at PGI kind of befriended me and took me under their wing, and basically gave me a crash course telling me how how fireworks work.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't have a sufficient understanding at the beginning to know. I was going by what I could see in the sky, and I didn't know things like, as an example, one thing that I thought would be very interesting when I was writing the software from purely a graphics perspective was I thought it would be very interesting to be able to adjust the break delays of every shell differently, so that you could kind of adjust when the break occurs after or before the crest of the trajectory. And I came up with some show designs that I thought were very pretty because the trajectory and the break were all part of what made each shell different and interesting. And that was an idea that I had just thinking about it from a guy who didn't know how fireworks worked, just from graphics. I learned very quickly, as people told me, no, that would take too much preparation time. Pretty much all of our shells have
fixed delay,
the lift time that they have. Yeah. That's not a thing you can adjust. So I had to learn those things.
Yeah, it's interesting, and sometimes I start fireworks also like you because I like it. And when you come from outside, you bring ideas. Some are, I will say, stupid, or and other maybe seems different from what people is used to do. But sometimes they are, like I say, like a game changer, like I said on the beginning. And I think the big game changer on your software was really the scripting language, being able to write the name of a shell or name of a firework effect, and the software recognized automatically what effect it is and give you a representation what you are writing. I think that was really what made the difference, because it will allow you to, without the complex programmation, have a visualization of what you are doing on your scripting software.
Yeah, we call that VDL, or the standard language for describing effects. And it was actually it was in Portugal. It was in Porto.
Yeah.
At the ISF fireworks convention in Porto that I was demonstrating Finale, and a number of people at the show gave me the feedback that the 3D graphics were pretty, or sorry, that wasn't even 3D at the time, that the 2D graphics were pretty, but that they really needed a way to import the inventory of effects that they use in their shows, because if you have to sit down and create a simulation of 1,000 or several thousand effects just to get started, that's too much work that you have to put in kind of before you start getting back some benefit. And that was the origin of VDL.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really what makes simple to use. Of course, not just that, the software it's built by professionals, so it's have a very good quality. And something that I like in you and in your team is that you hear our suggestions. I will say a defect. I'm very picky on these kind of things, and I'm very frontal in some things, and I like to tell what is my idea, how I think the software can be improved. And it's not a lot of times that I get this kind of feedback of hearing, okay, can you explain me better why you need this or why you need that? And I think this is really important on the development of software.
There's an interesting aspect to that. I think the way to end up with the best software product is to have a combination of two responsibilities. One is the responsibility to be humble. It's just humility, because if you, as the software author, think you know everything, then, well, you don't know everything. And in fact, even if you're the smartest guy in the world, you still don't know everything, because user interface is often counterintuitive. But the second thing is, the second responsibility is that you have to be the steward of the software and its development. So you have to have a point of view and a mission, and then you have a responsibility to make the calls to keep the software coherent and understandable. If you just take every suggestion that everybody gives you and add them to the software,
yeah, of course,
every suggestion has a little menu item or a little change to the user interface, and it'll just become a mess.
Yeah.
So I think the hardest part about designing software is combining the responsibility of taking in suggestions from everyone, which are often very good suggestions, and combining that with the responsibility of keeping the software simple and understandable and coherent, which sometimes means you have to say no to suggestions, and sometimes means that you just have to keep thinking about how to implement that suggestion in a way that is coherent with the other decisions that have already been made.
It was in APA, I think. I don't know if it was in APA that I give you a list of, 25 or 30 ideas. And you are sending me feedback, we already accomplished to do this. One thing was the grouping that was really marvelous, that you understood my idea and other ideas. So that is also very, as a client, it's also very gratifying to have, someone that is working with you. And of course, there's different ways to work. Like in America, you work in a way, and in Europe, you work in a different way. And you already understood that, your software is not just made for the American market. You start to implement things regarding, for example, delays that we use in Europe and is not so common to use in US. In US, you usually use a image for each piece, and Europe, we use more delaying, more image between each piece. And having the capacity to implement these kind of things that can be used in the different markets, I think it's really, really very, very good.
It's funny. I was thinking about your suggestions. It must have been a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And two of them came to mind because they were just ideas that were obviously great after I saw them, but I didn't really appreciate them until I saw them. So it's sort of an example of those ideas where, even the software designer doesn't realize just how good an idea it was. The two that come to mind are, you had an idea for a button on the timeline that would just zoom into the area that you're working on at that time. And after I implemented that feature, it became my favorite feature. And then you had another one about simplifying the timeline by selecting things and putting them in a group without having to name the group.
Yeah.
And that suggestion just completely changed the way that feature felt and worked. Previously, you had to give a name to the group.
Yeah.
And when you have to give a name to a group, you have to come up with a name in your head, and then it's sort of a heavier weight decision to decide, okay, that group effects, I'm going to give a name. It's the thing on the left that is the beginning of the sequence, whatever. On the other hand, if you can just sort of click a button and it collapses, and then you can uncollapse it later if you want, that was just different.
Are you already thinking on the next version, or are you still trying to close this one?
Oh, well, we've got a long way to go. So on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
where 10 is what you and I and other people have in our heads about like the dream of how good software could be, we're at about a 3 right now. So it's not like we're at a 9 just polishing things and we're going to get to a 10 and be done with it at the end of the year. Now we're at a 3. We're not even halfway there. We're just getting done. It's usable, and people appreciate what we have, and there's so far to go in improvement. There's so much we can do that is beyond just the basic features that we needed to have.
I think on the last talk we had, I think it was the APA, I told you that, I can recognize a show if it was made in Finale or not. Mainly because of the kind of patterns that are used in Finale. And this will be a tool that needs to be, upgraded or whatever you can call it, to a level that you don't know where it was designed. You don't recognize the patterns, or not everyone used the same kind of pattern that are on the pattern library.
It's interesting to just think of 10 years as being the development span of a software application, so that it might be mature 5 years from now. It's definitely not mature now. It might be mature 5 years from now. Software can have a long lifespan of development.
Yeah, I think it's true also in this industry that is a small industry. I imagine to program AutoCAD or these kind of programs, you have a lot of programmers, and you have of course a small team, because of course the industry is they have the size that it have, but it's until now it's being a very good progress. Of course, I would like to see my my suggestions faster, but I really understand it, and sometimes I also hold it a little, and so I don't give it too much ideas, and so I just give you what I think that is really, really important, and with time we will, and so of course also with the experience, because I also had to change the way I was working, so I have also to be humble on my side to see, let's see, okay, I was used to doing it one way, let's see if I learn to do in a different way. But I think, at least in my point of view, that the next thing, beside of course all the development that you are doing in programming, visualization, optimizing the software, will be transformed in something that is like a collaborative tool that can work on the cloud, where I can have a group of designers working on the same project at the same time. That I think will also allow us to work in a more complex level of work. I can have, for example, a designer that is just deciding, what each part have, and I have a special designer just to do angles, and a special, just like you work in animation, when you do a animation, a cartoon, like a movie, you have each animators, the one just do movements, the other just do that. So I think this could be an interesting tool, of course, in the next, I will say, 5 years. Will, how you see the Finale in 10 years from now? 3D goggles?
10 years from now. I'll be honest with you. It's hard for me to think out 10 years. It's easier for me to think out 5. I'm not really thinking 3D goggles in the 5-year time frame. It's on our roadmap that 5 years from now, the application will be running in the cloud. We'll have the client application that you're using on your laptop or desktop or iPad or mobile phone or smartphone, and that's a transition that we are already working on right now, and it's a 5-year transition. So most of the application is written in C++ and in what's called a shader language for the graphics. and already there are parts of the application, like the new effect editor, that we've been trying to get out. And it isn't quite released yet, but the effect editor is written entirely in JavaScript, which is the language that can run in browsers. So over the course of the next 5 years, we will be converting more and more of the application to JavaScript so that it will run in browsers.
In any operating system, basically.
And on any operating system, yeah.
Yeah.
So we abandoned plans for doing a Mac native version because we realized that would be smarter for us to apply to a version that runs in browsers and on phones.
Yeah, that are very good news, because I think there's a big percentage of designers that uses a Mac, Apple computer.
Myself, I use a Mac myself.
I know it's not normal that the programmer uses. Usually the programmers are more in PC, but you use Apple, so you understand what I mean. So the majority of designers I know, they use Apple, so we have to use Bootcamp or other kind of way, or Parallels, whatever. What makes it more complicated. Will, you have some features you want to show us in terms of pattern creation on Finale?
Sure. I was going to show you something just funny. A few minutes ago, you mentioned ideas, and we talked about having humility. So I had an example that I thought I would bring up here.
Yeah, please.
Let me share my screen. So Vitor, a few years ago, some people asked me to implement a function to randomize effects in a front. And I couldn't understand why that would be useful. In fact, I thought, well, that would be a dumb feature. And finally, I ended up implementing it because the people asking for it insisted. And so I eventually implemented this randomize feature, and it just became one of my favorite features. So I thought I would show it because it's an example of something I had no idea this would be a good feature. I thought it would be a dumb feature. It turned out to be just delightful. So if you have a front of positions like this here, where I think I've put out 50 positions or so, and I'm just going to insert an effect into all of them of a comet. Just put in a red comet there. So you can see there's just a whole bunch of red comets shooting up at once. And now I'm going to duplicate those effects to get maybe 4 or 5 per shot, per position. So I'll just duplicate once. Okay, so now we've got a lot more effects. They look almost like mines now. Okay. Now I'm going to put them into a sequence separated by 1/10 of a second in between them. And as you can see, it moves across from left to right. And then that just sets up this randomize feature, which was just to select all of the effects and reorder them and put them in a random order. And that's it. Now watch when I play this back. It just creates a lovely field of kind of a wall of color, and you could do things like change the color. I'll change these to blue. Change these to be peach. And try again.
Yeah.
So it was so lovely to do. And then so I implemented this feature and I fell in love with it immediately and gave it back to the people who asked for it. And then they told me that I had a bug. And they said, it's not random. I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, sometimes in your randomize feature, that there would be two shots that would come out of the same position, one after another. And they said, well, that's not random. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure that I had a good random number generator and that I was doing it really random. I didn't think I had a bug. But what I realized was that if you have two shots or three or four come out in sequence from the same position, one after another, that even though that actually is random, if you just roll random dice, sometimes the dice comes up with the same number twice in a row. Even though it actually is random, it sort of catches your eye if you're watching a fireworks show and it doesn't look random. So the feature that the person wanted actually was not just randomized. It was randomized with some adjustments to remove whenever a sequence would occur by happenstance. And so we added that, and you don't notice, but you don't notice when it's working. So in this example that we were playing here, there are never two shots in a row coming from the same position. But if this was truly random, there would be. Anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. It sort of comes back to the point about you have to be humble, because you might think that you know what you're doing at the beginning, and you learn that there's always something.
So Will, thank you. This was a real pleasure, and I hope we can talk. I like a lot to talk with you because you you hear my crazy ideas, so that is good. It's good. All good for finale. I imagine this is also a trouble moment, maybe in terms of sales for finale, but I imagine like in 2 or 3 months this all will be over, and we can continue in our lives, and we can continue doing fireworks for thousands of people.
I'll toast to that. Thank you, Vitor. I think there are going to be a lot of people in a couple of months see fireworks.
Yeah, I think so also.
All right, thank you.